Welcome back. Let's take you now to the high-level session of the United Nations on reaffirming peace as a path to sustainable economic development. Let's listen in.
80th anniversary. The theme of today's meeting, the UN at 80, reaffirming peace as a path to sustainable economic development, speaks strongly to where the world is today, as well as reminds us of the raison d'etre of the United Nations and its charter's foundational role in promoting peace, development, and human rights. South Africa looks forward to a meaningful discussion that can contribute towards addressing global peace and sustainable development. Without further delay, let us commence with our opening session and allow me to invite His Excellency President Matamela Cyril Ramaphosa to deliver his address. Mr. President, you have the floor.
Thank you, Minister Lamola, the Minister of International Relations of South Africa, Your Excellency, Mr. Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Excellencies who are here present, G20 member states and distinguished ministers of foreign relations who are part of this meeting, and representatives of international organizations and regional economic communities, and heads of delegations and distinguished guests. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to this G20 Foreign Ministers meeting. South Africa has placed solidarity, equality, and sustainability at the center of its G20 presidency. This is driven by our conviction that global challenges can only be resolved through cooperation, collaboration, as well as partnership. We are hosting this second Foreign Ministers meeting alongside the 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly to reaffirm the G20's commitment to UN values and to emphasize the centrality of the United Nations as the foremost multilateral organization in the world. As the countries of the world gather, as we are gathered now for the 80th anniversary of the United Nations, we are all as countries reaffirming peace as a path to sustainable economic development. Without peace, there can be no sustainable development. At the same time, inclusive economic development is vital to peace by addressing the root causes of conflict. The international community today confronts many challenges. The promise of sustainable development is getting further away from our reach. More than 85% of the Sustainable Development Goals are currently off track, with setbacks particularly acute in fighting hunger, extreme poverty, and rising inequality. The climate crisis deepens the problem. Extreme weather events are inflicting severe losses, particularly across Africa and other climate-vulnerable regions of the world. War and conflict is causing massive loss of life, displacing millions and creating humanitarian catastrophes. These crises test social resilience or societal resilience and expose structural injustices, gradually the world looks to the G20 as the premier forum of international economic cooperation to provide leadership in addressing these urgent challenges. While the global economy has shown some resilience, we must acknowledge the pressing issues of low growth, high debt, tightened financial conditions, and constrained fiscal space are truly debilitating our progress. To respond to these issues, we need meaningful reforms of the international financial architecture. We must increase grant and concessional financing. We must enhance multilateral coordination on debt and draw the private sector in and ensure equal participation in decision-making on the international economic order. As part of our G20 presidency priorities, we as South Africa advocate for actions to support low-income and developing economies through debt sustainability and reducing the cost of capital. We have appointed an African panel of experts to work on recommendations addressing impediments to growth and development in Africa, including on the issue of cost of capital. We recently launched the G20 Extraordinary Committee of Independent Experts on Global Wealth Inequality, which is chaired by Nobel laureate Professor Joseph Stiglitz. The committee will develop the first ever official G20 paper on global inequality. We are pleased that world leaders collectively adopted the Seville Commitment, a detailed blueprint to address the sustainable development financing gap and solutions to reshape global financial system. Let me thank you for your support for our G20 presidency, priorities, and deliverables. The challenges confronting our people and the planet today can only be resolved through cooperation, collaboration, and partnership. And in closing, let me say, we extend our thanks and our gratitude to many of you who, through your various country departments or ministries, and including international organizations that have been participating with us in the some 130 meetings that have been held leading to the Leaders Summit, which will be held in Johannesburg in November this year. The meetings have been held throughout the length and the breadth of the country, and the reports I've been receiving is that those meetings have been impactful. A number of agreements and consensus have been reached, and which bodes well for the holding of the Leaders Summit in November. So all in all, South Africa's G20 presidency has been going on more than we had ever expected. And even those countries that were doubtful about their full participation have come round to realize that the issues that we have put on the agenda of the world to be addressed are impactful, they are meaningful, and they are going to be to the benefit of all the people in the world and not just some people or some countries. So we are humbled by your participation, which has been ongoing. There are only 30 meetings that are left to be held in South Africa and elsewhere before we hold the Leaders Summit. Lastly, I'd like to thank the United Nations for the support, and indeed other international organizations for the support that has been lended to South Africa But I especially want to thank the Secretary General for his continued support and advice. And I said to him earlier in a tete-a-tete that we would not have been able to carry the load of chairing the G20 process without the support from the United Nations. So I look forward to receiving you all and your esteemed delegations at the G20 Leaders Summit in Johannesburg in November. Yes, I do invite you to come to the most beautiful country in the world, South Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. We now give the floor to the Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency Antonio Guterres. You now have the floor.
Your Excellency Cyril Ramaphosa, President of the Republic of South Africa and of the G20, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I thank the government of South Africa for bringing us together and for your focus on the interconnections between peace and sustainable economic development. We know when violence erupts, capital flees, services collapse, and poverty deepens. When development falters, social contracts fray, institutions weaken, and instability follows. And climate change intensifies the pressure at every turn. Heat, drought, floods, and storms are stress tests on fragile states and a drag on growth everywhere. Climate shocks fuel hunger, inflame tensions, and force displacement. Unsustainable debt is trapping nations and mortgaging their future. Meanwhile, we just released a report that found global military spending soared to $2.7 trillion last year, nearly 13 times all official development aid. By comparison, the UN's regular budget, 750 times smaller, is a rounding error. At the same time, only 1 in 5 SDG targets is on track, and the financing gap is growing. We must choose a different path. The Financing for Development Conference in Seville delivered a clear message. We need financial justice. That means an overhaul of the international financial architecture to make it fairer and fit for today's realities. It means supporting countries in debt distress, helping them recover while preventing future crises, tripling the lending capacity of multilateral development banks and expanding their role in de-risking private investment, and enhancing the participation of developing countries in global institutions and the decision-making processes. And we must go further. The Pact for the Future adopted last year is our blueprint for a more inclusive, accountable, and effective multilateral system. Excellencies, under South Africa's presidency, the G20 has set a clear compass: solidarity, equality, sustainability. Together, your countries represent 2/3 of humanity and over 4/5 of the world economy. Your choices send signals to markets, institutions, and governments everywhere. At this pivotal moment, I see 4 immediate priorities. First, rebuilding trust in international cooperation. As we mark the United Nations 80th year, we must recommit to the Charter's obligations: restraint, the peaceful settlement of disputes, and the protection of civilians. Emerging technologies in warfare must remain under meaningful human control, and rules must be shaped by all, especially developing countries and affected communities. Second, investing in prevention and peacemaking. Diplomacy, mediation, and inclusive governance remain the strongest tools, but they require resources and political will. By supporting mediators, empowering local peace builders, and fostering inclusive processes, we can address the root causes of conflict before violence takes hold. Third, confronting the climate crisis. Integrating climate risk into peace and development strategies prevents shocks from becoming breakdowns. Regional cooperation on water, food, early warning lowers tension and curbs displacement. Climate adaptation creates jobs and brings stability, protecting populations. And fourth, making finance deliver for peace and prosperity. From prevention to climate action, progress depends on access to affordable, timely, and long-term financing and the reduction of the cost of capital. When borrowing costs fall and fiscal space widens, governments can invest in development and resilience and prevent crises. That makes us all safer. Excellencies, peace is not a dividend of development. It is its foundation and highest return investment. Financial justice is not an aspiration. It is a requirement for global stability. Let us work together to reaffirm peace as the surest path to sustainable economic development, and multilateralism, the anchor of a safer, fairer future for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary General. The President of the General Assembly is not going to make this session. She sends her regards to the SG and also to the President. It will now conclude this session, the opening segment of our meeting. I would like to ask you to remain in your seats as President Ramaphosa, the Secretary General of the UN, leave the meeting. Thank you very much, Your Excellencies. Good luck. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, well, that concludes the addresses by South African President Cyril Ramaphosa as well as the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, having delivered their addresses at the G20 meeting for foreign ministers that's happening in New York. The meeting happening a few weeks, really, ahead of South Africa's G20 Leaders Summit that will be taking place in Johannesburg in November. And also this happens as it marks the 80th anniversary for the UN. Both leaders essentially having reaffirmed just the importance of peace as a pathway for inclusive economic and sustainable development, and have called for more accountability, more collaboration and partnerships, as well as multilateralism for a sustainable development. And of course, President Cyril Ramaphosa just reaffirming that in its efforts to tackle the global polycrises, South Africa has themed its G20 presidency under the theme Solidarity, Quality and Sustainability. And it's something really that has been seen across most of its G20 working groups since South Africa took its G20 presidency in December 2024. We'll continue to listen in some of those discussions. Let's take you there now again.
The Troika members, Brazil and the United States of America, will speak first. They will be followed by the other G20 members in alphabetical order, according to the English name of each country or organization. The guest countries of the South Africa's G20 presidency will follow suit. Subsequently, I will give the floor to the other UN member states, permanent observers represented at the ministerial level, and heads of other international organizations present at this meeting, wishing to speak, in accordance with the list circulated to all participants and available through the web link provided by the Secretariat. I would like to ask everyone's cooperation in strictly observing the 3 minutes time limit for interventions of states and 2 minutes of heads of international organizations. As Brazil will take the floor as a member of the Troika for the first time in this meeting, it will have 5 minutes to deliver a statement, followed by the US. The rest is in accordance with the minutes I've announced. As we have a very long list of countries wishing to intervene in our meeting, keeping your speeches within this time limit is very important and will be much appreciated by all. Lastly, all speakers are invited to send their statements to the Secretariat for both purposes of translations and records. I will start with my own opening remark and statement, which will be followed by Brazil and the US. Honorable Ministers of Foreign Affairs of the G20 members, Honorable Ministers of Foreign Affairs of invited guest countries, Honorable fellow Foreign Ministers of UN members and permanent observers, G20 Sherpas and Shoe Sherpas, heads of international organizations, distinguished guests, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me once again to welcome you all to the second G20 Foreign Ministers meeting under South Africa's presidency of the group. It is both an honor and a privilege for South Africa to be hosting this meeting here at the United Nations headquarters as it celebrates the 80th anniversary of its founding. 8 years since its establishment, the United Nations remain most central in the collective global efforts towards addressing global challenges and the threats to peace and security, addressing poverty and underdevelopment, and ensuring the protection of human rights. Let me from the onset state that South Africa, the United Nations General Assembly, with its universal representations, where every country participates on an equal footing, is and will always remain the chief deliberative, policy-making, and representative organ of the United Nations in every sphere, including in global economic governance. We acknowledge the complementary role of the G20 in these efforts. Honorable Ministers, South Africa's presidency of the G20 is centered on the theme solidarity, equality, and sustainability, as our President Cyril Ramaphosa has already stated, which is premised on the belief that only in collaboration, partnership, and cooperation can we address the collective challenges facing the world. The theme of today's meeting, the United Nations at 80, reaffirming peace as a path to sustainable development, is one that encapsulates the spirit, purposes, and principles of the UN Charter and what it represents: cooperation, dialogue, prosperity, and solidarity. This is a concept to which we as the global community must aspire, and where the G20 together with the United Nations must take collective action. In an international environment plagued by ills of poverty, inequality, and underdevelopment, rising geopolitical tensions and increasing conflicts, environmental devastation, escalating trade tensions, and growing threats to multilateral cooperation, we must work together to ensure our aspirations of peaceful and a prosperous society. Peace and development have always been interdependent. Without peace, there can be no sustainable development. Similarly, investments in economic development and inclusive growth can contribute to a more peaceful environment. As the global community, investment in peace and collective collaboration are crucial necessities for growth, stability, and sustainable development. For societies, livelihoods, and economies to thrive, the shifting global dynamics must be met with more and not less global cooperation. Revitalize multilateralism, enhance efforts in addressing inequalities, and increase investments in inclusive, sustainable development where no one is left behind. These collective actions are essential in fostering lasting peace and stability. History has proven more than once that a fair, transparent, and inclusive rules-based international order is an essential requirement for economic stability and for sustained growth. Multilateral cooperation is our only hope for overcoming unprecedented challenges, including slow, uneven growth, rising debt burdens, persistent poverty, and inequality. We must foster international cooperation for a peaceful world towards sustainable development. We need to strengthen cooperation and rebuild trust in multilateralism. Excellencies, in our collective goal is to achieve sustainable development. The G20, together with the United Nations, must be in sync and complementary in its actions and efforts towards a more prosperous world and addressing our shared challenges. We must work together to shape a more inclusive and sustainable global economy. In order to do this, amongst others, we need to be more robust in multilateralism and renewed commitment to the purposes and principles of the UN Charter. Trust in multilateral institutions has dwindled due in part to not delivering on inclusive and sustainable growth for all. The global financial system must be made fit for purpose to change the current trajectory in financing sustainable development, including by ensuring debt sustainability for low-income countries. We must address challenges in the multilateral trading system, ensuring that it is inclusive, predictable, and governed by a rules-based system. We also need to foster inclusivity and reduce inequality if we are to leave no one behind. Lastly, we need to adhere to and uphold international law towards a more stable and fair international order. These are only some of the efforts we need to undertake. As the G20 and the United Nations, we need to seize every opportunity to raise ambition and harness collective action for a peaceful and a prosperous world. As I conclude, let me reiterate that South Africa's upcoming G20 Leaders Summit will send a clear signal that the G20 stands united behind a strong UN at the center of multilateralism, and we will endeavor to take steps to resolve global challenges while strengthening international relations and cooperations within a rules-based system. I will now hand over to the members of the G20 to deliver their interventions, starting with the Troika, Brazil, and thereafter the United States of America, followed by the G20 members in English alphabetical order, as I have already stated, and invited guest countries also in alphabetical order. Honorable Minister Mario Vieira, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Brazil, you now have the floor.
Your Excellency, Minister Ronald Lamola, Your Excellencies, Ministers of Foreign Affairs of the G20, members and invited countries, distinguished permanent representatives, ladies and gentlemen, allow me first of all to thank South Africa for organizing the second G20 Foreign Ministers meeting in 2025 here at the United Nations, building upon the initiative of the Brazilian G20 presidency in 2024. When Brazil organized this event for the first time exactly 1 year ago, the idea was to combine the relevance of G20 on international economic cooperation with the importance of the UN as the center of the international multilateral system. It's a pleasant development to see this view taking root. Ladies and gentlemen, the theme chosen for the South African G20 presidency this year, Solidarity, Equality and Sustainability, highlights the connection between individuals, society, and the environment. We commend South Africa's focus on inclusive economic growth with an emphasis on employment, fighting inequality, and promoting industrialization. I would also like to commend South Africa for choosing food security as one of the main themes in its G20 presidency. Hunger and poverty remain among the greatest challenges faced by humanity in the 21st century. This is unacceptable. To face this problem with concrete measures, the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty was launched at the G20 Leaders Summit held in Rio de Janeiro last November. As of now, the initiative has gathered 198 members with all G20 members as well as international organizations and financial institutions. On behalf of the Brazilian government, I extend my gratitude to all those present that have supported the alliance since its inception. Ladies and gentlemen, in 2024, while the global economy grew by 3.2%, military expenditures surged by 9.4%, reaching 2.7 trillion. Meanwhile, official development assistance fell by 7.41% that same year. By fueling conflicts and perpetuating cycles of violence and inequality, excessive military expenditures undermine the very foundations of the just, secure, and peaceful world we seek to build. Brazil strongly opposes the use of military force to solve disputes. To counter this, we must strengthen global cooperation. As outlined in our G20 call to action on global governance reform adopted last year in this very meeting, the international system should be based on the UN Charter and international law, with modernized institutions and fairer representation that reflects today's world. As we witness the proliferation of deliberate attacks on the United Nations and international law, the very foundations of the multilateral order agreed upon 1945 are at an unprecedented risk. Therefore, those who reject the rule of force must stand together and send a strong message to commitment to the purpose of principles of the UN Charter. In celebrating the 80th anniversary of the United Nations, we must recommit to the Charter's purpose and principles and reflect on how to make this organization more capable to deliver on these foundational objectives. We now need a fit-for-purpose United Nations whose actions and initiatives are firmly grounded on the notion that can be no sustainable development without peace and no peace without sustainable development. This crisis in multilateralism is also evident in the current situation of the World Trade Organization. The paralysis of its dispute settlement mechanism has allowed for further trade fragmentation and the proliferation of unilateral measures, some of which being used in attempts to interfere in domestic affairs of states. On the negotiation pillar, core areas of interest for developing countries are yet to be addressed. The refounding of WTO is urgent, and Brazil is working on a proposal that we hope will be able to foster this debate. The full engagement of the international community is essential to face these challenges and build a multilateral system that is fair, inclusive, and effective. Ladies and gentlemen, during our G20 presidency in 2024, Brazil worked hard to address such key global issues, as well as to enact concrete contributions to help in alleviate hunger, poverty, and inequality, securing climate financing, and supported the much-needed reforms of global governance architecture. I am confident that we will be able to considerably step up our efforts and once again deliver tangible results given the robust priorities set out by South Africa's G20 presidency. I thank you.
Thank you very much, my dear brother, Mario Vieira. We'll now give the floor to the United States of America, Ms. Alison Hooker, the Undersecretary for Political Affairs. You now have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Excellencies, distinguished colleagues. It's my distinct honor to address you today on behalf of the United States. As a founding member of the United Nations and principal member of the G20, the United States believes deeply in the promise of our international institutions. As President Trump said just this week, the United Nations has such tremendous potential, but it is not even coming close to living up to that potential. One reason is that these institutions have drifted far from their original mandates. We no longer focus on what we set out to accomplish. That is why we believe it is time to get back to basics, returning to the core principles that inspired the creation of these institutions in the first place. For the G20, this mission is both straightforward and essential. This forum was established to promote economic growth and financial stability among the world's largest economies. Its purpose was to confront pressing global economic challenges and to create the conditions for prosperity. That is a tall but worthy task, one that demands clarity, focus, and discipline. Unfortunately, in recent years, the G20 has drifted. Too often, its agenda has expanded into areas well beyond its core remit. Instead of elevating urgent global economic matters through a consensus-based approach, the G20 has become entangled in debates over every political wedge issue of the day, whether on gender-responsive budgeting, nation building, or pandemic surveillance. Let me be clear. Expanding the G20's scope in this way does not strengthen the forum. It dilutes it and undermines our ability to deliver on our most basic responsibilities. As we prepare for the Leaders' Summit in November, the Trump administration urges all G20 members to return to first principles and restore this body to its rightful place as a global platform for economic cooperation. And as the incoming G20 president, the United States will champion this back to basics approach. Allow me to highlight 3 ways our presidency will differ from recent ones. First, we will recenter the G20 on its core economic mission. We will not spend hours debating out-of-touch social initiatives disconnected from growth and stability. Instead, we will concentrate on priorities that directly strengthen our economies and benefit our citizens. In other words, no diversity, equity, and inclusion or gender-responsive budgeting. Second, we will streamline the G20's processes. We will reduce the proliferation of working groups, cut back on bureaucratic excess, and sharpen our lines of effort. The goal is simple: to make our time together more efficient and more closely aligned with the forum's founding mandate. Third, we will focus on outcomes. The G20 was created to build resilience and stability in the global economy, not to produce lofty declarations that sit on a shelf. As President Trump reminded us earlier this week, empty words don't solve war, nor do they put food on people's tables. Next year, under President Trump's leadership, the G20 will work to deliver real outcomes, not just statements. In this spirit, the United States looks forward to working with each of you to renew the G20's role as an anchor of international economic cooperation. Together, we can deliver growth, stability, and prosperity for our nations and for the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Well, you've been watching the G20 foreign ministers meeting in New York. The second session is just what has concluded now. That's with the foreign ministers. Importantly, of course, the 3 foreign ministers that you've been hearing from are from the Troika, which consists of past, current, as well as incoming presidency, namely Brazil, as we've heard from that foreign minister there, as well as South Africa, and of course the incoming for 2026, the United States. Importantly, of course, South Africa having said that the United States will be represented by a delegate during this particular meeting, and the representative from the United States essentially echoing some of the utterances that were made by President Donald Trump during that UN debate that we saw not too long ago, marking the 80th anniversary of the United Nations, essentially saying that the United States has called for the return to basics in order to confront pressing challenges that the G20 has drifted away from, and saying that the G20 has essentially drifted away from its core mandate, and says that the UN has potential but is not living up to that. Also, just hinting on the fact that the United States will be represented by somebody in the Leaders Summit that will be happening in November. You would recall, of course, President Donald Trump saying that he will not be coming to the G20 Leaders Summit in November, but will be sending his Vice President, J.D. Vance. So the representative there is saying that they will deviate from the previous presidencies of the G20 with their core mission of going back to basics. But we'll continue then to unpack just some of those utterances that were made there, just hinting on how the United States will then be taking the baton from South Africa come November at the Leaders Summit of the G20.